The golden morning sun bathed the streets of Riverside, a town where charm often masked deeper wounds. On the surface, Riverside was everything a small American town aspired to be: manicured lawns, coffee shops on every corner, a courthouse wrapped in fluttering banners proclaiming civic pride. But beneath the awnings and red-bricked facades, tensions simmered, quiet, coiled, and waiting for a spark. Captain Naomi Fields stepped onto the bustling main street, her footsteps steady, her gaze alert. She wore a simple navy blue blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back into a low, professional bun. No uniform today. No badge. No formal announcement yet. It was her first day unofficially surveying her new post before the ceremony. Riverside's first black female police chief. She wanted to see the town as it truly was, unfiltered and unguarded, not through the lenses that would be put on once everyone knew who she was. Her path led her to the local Starbucks, tucked between a pharmacy and a used bookstore. Naomi pushed open the door, greeted by the familiar aroma of roasted coffee and cinnamon. The line was long, commuters grabbing fuel before work, students tapping away at laptops, baristas calling out orders with rehearsed cheerfulness. Naomi took her place at the end of the line, folding her hands patiently in front of her. She enjoyed observing people, the hurried, the tired, the kind ones who held doors, the sour ones who didn't. Every small gesture revealed volumes. As she waited, she felt a presence beside her, a large, heavy-set man who exuded impatience like a cologne. Officer Blake Harlan. She recognized him immediately from the personnel files she had been reviewing for weeks, a senior officer with a record that was technically clean but peppered with complaints that never quite stuck. Harassment. Excessive force. Conduct unbecoming. In person, he looked exactly as she imagined, thick-necked, red-faced, and radiating a kind of entitlement that came from years of unchecked authority. Blake didn't recognize her. To him, Naomi was just another face, another obstacle in his morning routine. He glanced at the line, scoffed, and with a grunt shoved his way directly in front of her. Naomi said nothing at first. She merely tilted her head slightly, observing. After a moment, she spoke, her voice calm and even. "Sir, there's a line." Blake turned, sneering down at her. "You don't like it, lady, go somewhere else." The conversation should have ended there, an ugly, forgettable moment. But it didn't. Blake's temper, always dangerously close to the surface, flared hot. He took a step closer, invading Naomi's personal space. His breath reeked of stale coffee and bitterness. "You people always got something to complain about," he muttered, voice low and venomous. Naomi felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the old, weary anger she had learned to master over years of service. She locked eyes with him, not flinching, not shrinking. And then it happened. Blake, still holding his freshly poured coffee, flung it straight into Naomi's face. The scalding liquid splashed across her skin, burning, blinding. She gasped, stumbling back, knocking into a table. Customers screamed. Someone dropped their phone. A barista cried out. Naomi, blinking rapidly through the pain, steadied herself against a chair. The world slowed. Time bent. Across the room, a young woman, no more than 20, held up her phone, recording everything. Blake realized too late what he had done. For a heartbeat, the coffee shop was silent except for the hum of the espresso machine and the ragged breathing of two people whose worlds had just collided. Blake's face twisted into something almost comical, a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief. "Serves you right," he spat, before storming out, the door slamming shut behind him. The patrons stood frozen, unsure what to do. Naomi straightened slowly, wiping the coffee from her burning skin with a napkin someone pressed into her hand. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the enormity of the moment. She could have pulled her badge right then. She could have shouted his name, his rank, demanded retribution in front of witnesses and camera phones. But she didn't. Instead, she gathered herself with the quiet dignity that had carried her through every battle before this one. Because this wasn't just about her. This was bigger. And Riverside, the whole world, would soon know. Hours later, Naomi sat alone in her temporary office at the precinct. The mirror above the sink revealed a red patch across her cheek, the skin angry but not broken. Superficial burns. Nothing permanent. But the wound that mattered wasn't physical. It was the truth laid bare. The ugliness that still festered under Riverside's painted smiles. A soft knock came at the door. It was Deputy Chief Raymond Cole, a wiry, middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a cautious manner. He handed Naomi a folder, her official welcome packet, then hesitated. "I heard there was an incident," he said carefully. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You heard?" Cole shrugged awkwardly. "Small town. News travels fast." She smiled thinly. "Good," she said. "They'll hear a lot more soon." By evening, the video hit the internet. The girl who had filmed it, Emily Suarez, a college freshman studying journalism, posted it to Twitter with the caption, "Black woman scalded by white officer over a coffee order. This is Riverside today. Hashtag justice for Naomi." Within an hour, it had over 50,000 views. By midnight, it was trending nationally. Outrage poured in like a flood. Civil rights activists reposted the video. Politicians issued vague statements of condemnation. News vans set up outside the Starbucks. Protesters began organizing a rally. And still, no one knew the full story. No one knew who Naomi really was. Not yet. In a cramped, beer-sour dive bar on the outskirts of town, Blake Harlan sat hunched over a drink, glowering at the TV screen. His face, grainy but unmistakable, stared back at him from the viral clip. A customer nudged his buddy, pointing. "Hey, ain't that?" Blake drained his glass and slammed it down hard enough to crack it. "They don't know who I am," he muttered under his breath. "I'm the goddamn law in this town." But deep down, a cold sliver of fear wormed into his gut. Because somewhere inside him, even Blake Harlan knew. You could bully people in the dark, but you couldn't bully a whole country when the lights were on. The next morning, the town square was a circus. News vans, protest signs, reporters shouting over each other. And in the center of it all, a hastily arranged platform adorned with the Riverside seal. The mayor, red-faced and sweating under the pressure, stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, "please welcome our new police chief, someone we believe will lead Riverside into a better future." There was a ripple through the crowd. Murmurs. Whispers. And then Naomi Fields emerged, walking calmly toward the podium. No hat. No sunglasses. No bandages to hide the red welt on her cheek. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. And from the back of the gathering, Blake Harlan froze, the blood draining from his face. As Naomi took the microphone, she paused, her gaze sweeping the sea of stunned faces. Her eyes locked on Blake's. She smiled, slow, fierce, undeniable. And then she spoke, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "My name is Naomi Fields. I am your new chief of police. And change is coming to Riverside." The roar of the crowd swallowed the square. Blake stumbled backward, vanishing into the chaos. But there was no hiding now. Not for him. Not for anyone. By the time the sun climbed high over Riverside, the video of Officer Blake Harlan throwing scalding coffee onto an unsuspecting black woman had already been replayed millions of times across every corner of America. Except now the woman wasn't anonymous anymore. She was Police Chief Naomi Fields. And that changed everything. National news networks interrupted regular programming with urgent banners. Newly appointed black police chief assaulted by officer, viral outrage erupts. Cable commentators debated breathlessly. How could this happen in 2025? What does it say about systemic bias in small-town America? Will Riverside ever recover its reputation? Twitter was a wildfire. Hashtag justice for Naomi. Hashtag fire Harlan. Hashtag Chief Fields. Local businesses in downtown Riverside plastered "We support Chief Fields" signs in their windows. A GoFundMe for community reform initiatives set up by local activists raised $50,000 in under 24 hours. Protests swelled outside the Starbucks where the assault took place, peaceful but fierce, signs bobbing like stormy seas. Our town, our justice. No more silence. Leadership deserves respect. Inside the Riverside Police Department, tension turned viscous. Naomi sat behind her wide oak desk, scrolling through footage from various angles, amateur videos, security tapes, local news broadcasts. Across from her sat Deputy Chief Raymond Cole, looking more like a man bracing for a hurricane than offering advice. "You know," he said carefully, "you could press full criminal charges against him right now. Battery on a police chief? Assault? Your case is ironclad." Naomi set the tablet down, lacing her fingers together. "I know. Then why wait?" She met his eyes evenly. "Because this isn't just about one man, Ray. It's about the rot that let him think he could do it. If we only cut off the top branch, the disease stays." Cole exhaled heavily. He respected her, but he wasn't blind to the dangers. There were officers and powerful ones who didn't want Naomi sitting where she was. This could turn bloody fast. Meanwhile, Blake Harlan was unraveling. Sequestered in a crumbling ranch house on the outskirts of town, he paced like a caged animal. His phone buzzed with calls he didn't answer. Old friends in the department, allies, and drinking buddies, now distancing themselves one by one. He ripped open a beer can with trembling fingers, chugging it down before slamming it into the wall. "They can't do this to me," he snarled. "I'm the real cop here. I bled for this town." But in the pit of his stomach, he knew. Riverside was already moving on, and Blake Harlan was about to be left behind. At City Hall, the mayor held a frantic emergency meeting. "You have to control the narrative," a PR consultant urged. "Chief Fields must appear strong but forgiving. You need to reassure the town without escalating the divide." Mayor Lindstrom wiped sweat from his brow. He had ridden the old systems for years: backdoor deals, quiet cover-ups, performative politics. But Naomi wasn't part of the old system, and he wasn't sure if he was smart enough or brave enough to ride out what was coming. That night, Naomi made her first public statement. Standing on the courthouse steps, facing an ocean of flashing cameras and eager reporters, she looked every inch the symbol Riverside didn't know it needed until now. Her cheeks still bore the faint memory of the burn, but her posture was unshakable. "I stand here today not just as your chief of police," Naomi said, voice unwavering, "but as a daughter, a neighbor, a citizen who loves this town. I believe Riverside can be better. Not through silence. Not through anger. Through accountability." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd. "And that accountability begins with us, law enforcement." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, astonishment, admiration, and a spark of hope. She wasn't calling for vengeance. She was calling for change. Real change. But in the shadows of that hope, darkness brewed. Inside a dim bar across town, Blake nursed another drink. Sitting with him were two other off-duty officers, men who had always grumbled about political correctness and losing the town. "They'll throw you under the bus, man," one muttered. "She's got the whole damn internet behind her." Blake's eyes narrowed. "Not if we fight back." The men leaned in. Plans were whispered. Names were mentioned. Naomi's enemies weren't giving up yet, and they were about to cross a line from which they couldn't return. At the police station late that night, Naomi stayed behind long after the others had gone home. The building was silent except for the occasional creak of old pipes and the distant hum of passing cars. She reviewed personnel files, pages of hidden truths. The more she read, the clearer the picture became. Blake wasn't alone. There was a network, a culture that had protected men like him for years. Dismissed complaints. Buried investigations. Rewarded silence. This wasn't just about coffee in the face. This was about an entire system that thought it could get away with it forever. Naomi closed the file, her mind sharpening into purpose. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just be Riverside's first black woman chief. She would be its reckoning. The morning light crept over Riverside, pale and cautious, as if the town itself knew something monumental was coming. Inside the police station, Chief Naomi Fields moved with a purpose that turned heads. No casual greetings. No wasted steps. She was a woman with a mission. Today, she wasn't just leading. She was cleaning house. At the daily briefing, Naomi stood at the front of the conference room, a modest space adorned with faded American flags and framed commendations. The officers, some curious, some wary, some openly hostile, filled the chairs before her. Naomi placed a stack of files on the podium. "I know many of you have questions," she began, voice calm but firm. "About what happened. About what's happening." She let her gaze sweep across the room, pausing on familiar faces. Officer Linda Reyes, one of the few who had quietly shown support. Officer Terry Boone, stone-faced, arms crossed in resentment. Deputy Chief Raymond Cole, sitting rigidly, unreadable. "I'll be clear," Naomi continued. "This department will be better. Starting today, we are reviewing every outstanding complaint, every ignored misconduct report, every file that someone thought would never see the light of day." A murmur rippled through the room, unease, fear, and for a few, a flicker of hope. Naomi pressed forward. "Transparency is not a threat. Accountability is not an attack. If you're here to serve and protect this community with honor, you have nothing to fear. If you're here to protect yourself at the expense of others, your time is up." For a long beat, no one spoke. Then, Linda Reyes gave a single, sharp nod. Others shifted uncomfortably. Terry Boone muttered something under his breath. Naomi heard it. She chose not to respond. Not yet. Behind closed doors, Naomi convened a small task force, officers she trusted, both old allies and new faces. Together, they reopened dormant cases. Complaints buried under layers of bureaucracy. Body cam footage lost during key incidents. Internal affairs reports manipulated or deleted. Patterns emerged. And they all led back to a core group of officers, a fraternity of silence and protectionism at the heart of which sat Blake Harlan. Meanwhile, Blake wasn't sitting idle. From his seedy motel room, he spun darker and more desperate schemes. The backlash against him grew stronger every day. He was suspended pending investigation, no badge, no gun, no shield. But Blake still had connections. And venom. Gathered around him were a handful of loyalists. Officer Tom Deeks, bitter and reckless. Officer Rick Spencer, nervous but easily swayed. They drank cheap beer, whispering in the thick, cigarette-soaked air. "She's trying to destroy us," Blake said, voice low and dangerous. "She's not one of us. She doesn't understand this town. She's got half the department scared," Deeks said. "The mayor too." Blake's lip curled. "Good. Fear is how you win." They planned to leak false stories about Naomi. That she covered up crimes back in her old precinct. That she manipulated her way into the chief's chair through politics and pity. Lies spun with just enough truth to sow doubt. And if that failed? Blake had darker thoughts swirling at the edges of his mind. At the same time, Naomi faced an unexpected betrayal. Deputy Chief Raymond Cole, her second-in-command, began leaking sensitive information about the internal investigations to select media outlets and conservative groups. Under pressure from old alliances and perhaps his own biases, Cole decided Naomi was too much of a threat to the old ways to survive. The first hit piece dropped. Chief Fields waging witch hunt against good cops, department morale plummets. Anonymous quotes from insiders painted Naomi as tyrannical, divisive, power-hungry. The goal was simple. Erode public trust. Isolate Naomi. Force her out before the reforms could take root. But Naomi was ready. She met with a quiet ally, Officer Jacob Hill, a tech-savvy younger cop whose father had been wrongly imprisoned years ago by corrupt policing. Together, they traced the leaks. And they found them. Cole's fingerprints were all over the communications. In a quiet meeting behind closed doors, Naomi confronted Cole. The man blanched as she laid out the evidence. "You had a choice," Naomi said, voice soft but cutting. "To stand with what's right. You chose fear." Cole stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Naomi didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply said, "You're done here." By the end of the day, Cole resigned for personal reasons, his disgraceful exit buried under carefully worded press releases. Naomi didn't celebrate. There was too much left to do. That night, standing alone in her modest apartment, Naomi looked out at Riverside, a town grappling with change, aching and angry, but alive. She thought of all the battles yet to come. The resistance. The threats. The loneliness. But she also thought of the kids she saw waving signs that said, "We believe," outside the courthouse. The parents thanking her in hushed voices. The citizens daring to hope again. And she knew. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all of them. But across town, a storm gathered. Blake Harlan had moved beyond words. In the smoky backroom of a bar, over drinks and whispered oaths, Blake made a plan. A real one. Not gossip. Not rumors. A plan to take Naomi down permanently. And this time, he wouldn't be acting alone. The tension in Riverside grew so thick it could be sliced with a knife. At first, it was small things. Paperwork misplaced. Witnesses suddenly unwilling to cooperate. Anonymous complaints filed against Naomi, accusing her of creating a hostile work environment. Then the bigger cracks started to show. Patrol cars responding slower to backup calls. Investigations Naomi initiated delayed without explanation. Officers who once greeted her with tight, professional smiles now barely hid their disdain. The old guard was fighting back. And it wasn't just Blake Harlan anymore. It was the whole fragile system he embodied, angry, wounded, and desperate to survive. Late one night, Naomi sat in her office, the only light coming from the muted blue of her computer screen. She was reviewing body cam footage from an unrelated case when her phone buzzed. A text from Officer Linda Reyes. "Chief. Urgent. Need to talk. Not safe here. Meet me at Miller's Park. 20 minutes. Naomi frowned. Linda wasn't someone who panicked easily. Without hesitation, Naomi grabbed her jacket and headed out. Miller's Park was empty this time of night, just the rustle of wind through the dying leaves and the soft creak of old playground swings. Naomi spotted Linda near the basketball courts, pacing nervously under a broken street lamp. "Chief," Linda said in a rush, glancing around. "It's worse than you think." Naomi approached carefully, instinctively alert. "What's going on?" Linda took a shaky breath. "They're planning something. Blake. Deeks. Spencer. Maybe a few more. They're talking about setting you up, planting evidence. Drugs. A weapon. Something bad." Naomi's stomach tightened. "And if that doesn't work?" Linda swallowed hard. "They're talking about making it look like an accident." The words hung in the cold air. Naomi closed her eyes for a brief second, absorbing the blow. It wasn't surprising. Not really. But hearing it said aloud, hearing how close the danger now was, made it real in a way reports and rumors never could. Back at the station the next morning, Naomi moved differently. More careful. More deliberate. She wore a bulletproof vest under her blouse. She varied her routes home. She kept her closest allies, Linda Reyes, Jacob Hill, and a few others, informed of her whereabouts at all times. And she quietly, meticulously gathered evidence. She documented every strange mistake, every suspicious delay, every rumor swirling through the department halls. Because she knew she would only get one chance to stop them. Meanwhile, Blake tightened his circle. He met with Deeks and Spencer in a grimy storage facility off the interstate. "No more talking," Blake said, voice flat and deadly. "Tomorrow night. Miller's Park. She'll be there for that community meet and greet." Deeks shifted uneasily. "You sure, man? We do this, there's no coming back." Blake's eyes gleamed with a fanatical light. "There's already no coming back." Spencer nodded slowly. Deeks hesitated, then nodded too. They sealed their pact with silence. That same day, Naomi received a strange tip. A courier delivered a plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside, photocopies of text messages between Deeks, Spencer, and Blake. Maps of escape routes. Details of the planned ambush. Someone inside their circle had turned. Someone was betting on Naomi after all. Naomi and her team quickly set up a counter-operation. Undercover officers would blend into the crowd at Miller's Park. Sharpshooters would watch from nearby rooftops. Backup units on silent standby. If Blake and his men moved against her, this time it would be caught in the act. The night of the community meet and greet arrived. Miller's Park buzzed with nervous energy. Families with strollers. Teens tossing basketballs. Elderly couples in folding chairs, sipping sweet tea. Naomi wore civilian clothes, blending in as much as a woman of her stature could. Her eyes scanned the crowd, every muscle coiled, every sense on high alert. And then she saw them. Blake, Deeks, and Spencer moving through the park with forced casualness, their faces taut with tension. Naomi's earpiece crackled. "Units in position," Jacob's voice whispered. She kept moving, pretending not to notice as Blake's hand brushed the outline of a concealed weapon under his jacket. "Closer. Closer." Deeks veered left, flanking. Spencer slowed to Naomi's right. Blake closed in, a predatory smile twisting his lips. At the exact moment Blake reached for the weapon, the air exploded with movement. Plainclothes officers tackled Deeks and Spencer to the ground. Blake whipped his pistol free. But Naomi was faster. With a single, fluid motion, she sidestepped and slammed her elbow into his wrist, knocking the weapon free. Blake lunged wildly, but two undercover officers dropped him hard onto the grass, pinning him down. Cheers and shouts erupted across the park as the crowd realized what had happened. Children pointed. Adults snapped photos. The entire scene was being streamed live by half a dozen phones. There would be no spinning this. No cover-ups. Not this time. Later that night, Blake, Deeks, and Spencer sat handcuffed in the back of police cruisers. Their faces weren't angry anymore. Just hollow. Ruined. Naomi watched from the steps of the precinct, arms crossed over her chest as they were driven away. Raymond Cole's resignation was old news. The old regime's collapse was now inevitable. But Naomi didn't feel victorious. She felt ready. Ready to rebuild. Ready to give Riverside, maybe for the first time in its history, the leadership it deserved. Still, she knew. One final reckoning remained. The federal investigators were coming. The entire department would face review. The public would demand not just justice, but a full reformation. It would be the hardest chapter yet. But Naomi was no longer standing alone. And Blake Harlan? His story would serve as a warning, not a legacy. The news hit Riverside like a hammer blow. FBI launches full investigation into Riverside Police Department. It was everywhere: TV, radio, social media, and it couldn't be contained. The department that had once moved in silence now found its every secret, every backroom deal, every buried file dragged into the unforgiving light. In the heart of it all stood Chief Naomi Fields. Not untouched, not unscarred, but unbroken. The town was split, old loyalties versus the hope of a better future. Some residents cheered in the streets, waving signs that read, "Clean it out. Stand with Fields." Others gathered in dim bars and whispered about how things used to be better before outsiders changed everything. The divide had never been clearer. And Naomi knew. This was the most dangerous moment of all. Inside the department, the air was thick with paranoia. Officers who once strutted through the halls now moved with cautious eyes and hushed voices. FBI agents set up an independent review board. Subpoenas rained down like summer storms. Files vanished mysteriously, only for digital backups to reappear later, damning and inescapable. The rot was too deep to hide. And day by day, the old walls crumbled. One afternoon, Naomi sat in a windowless interview room across from a man she never thought she would see again without a badge. Blake Harlan. In his orange jumpsuit shackled to the floor, he looked smaller somehow, as if the rage that once inflated him had finally deflated, leaving only bitterness behind. "You think you won?" Blake rasped, voice cracked from sleepless nights. Naomi leaned forward slightly, meeting his bloodshot eyes. "I didn't win," she said quietly. "Riverside did." Blake sneered. "They'll turn on you. They always do." Naomi smiled, not out of arrogance, but out of something deeper. "I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to build something that lasts longer than fear." Blake laughed, dry and broken. "You'll see," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Good luck surviving it." Naomi stood, gathering the file from the table. "I already did," she said, and walked out without looking back. The next wave came harder. Anonymous threats in the mail. Graffiti sprayed across the station walls, "Traitor." Rumors swirling in online forums about Naomi's personal life, her faith, her family. The weight grew heavier each day. There were moments, alone in the silent hours of the night, when doubt gnawed at Naomi's armor. Was it worth it? Was the town even ready for the change she fought so hard to bring? One evening, exhausted and hollowed out by endless battles, Naomi visited Miller's Park, the place where they had tried to silence her. Now it was filled with life. Children running across the playground. Elderly couples walking hand in hand. Teenagers tossing basketballs under the watchful eye of newly reassigned community officers. A small boy, no more than 6, raced past her with a toy badge pinned proudly to his shirt. He stopped, looking up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Are you the real chief?" he asked. Naomi knelt down, smiling gently. "Yes, I am." The boy grinned, holding up a crumpled notebook. "Will you sign my police book?" Naomi took the pen he offered, her hand trembling slightly as she wrote her name. "To Noah. Always protect. Always serve. Always be brave." She handed it back, and the boy hugged her impulsively before darting off into the sunset. Naomi stood there a long time after he disappeared from view, letting the moment settle deep into her bones. Maybe it wasn't about the ones who shouted against her. Maybe it was about the ones who didn't even know how much they needed her yet. The following week, the Riverside Council held an open forum. Hundreds of residents packed into the town hall, a living, breathing testament to a town finally ready to confront itself. One by one, people stood up. A mother whose son had been unjustly arrested years ago. A former addict who spoke of harassment and mistreatment. A veteran who praised Naomi's reforms for restoring his faith in the badge. Tears. Shouts. Laughter. Applause. It was messy. It was raw. But it was real. And when Naomi finally rose to speak, the room fell silent. "I stand before you today not as a perfect leader," she began, "but as someone who believes Riverside can be better than its past. Better than its fear. Better than its worst moments. I can't promise we won't stumble. But I promise we'll stand up stronger each time we do. And we will do it together." The applause rose like a tide, lifting Naomi in its roar. This wasn't just a town facing its demons. It was a town choosing, finally, to fight for its better angels. But even as the night ended in triumph, Naomi knew the work wasn't over. It never would be. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a path. And Naomi Fields, battered but unbowed, was ready to walk it. Every single step. For Riverside. For tomorrow. For all those who would come after. The first real spring rains arrived in Riverside, washing the sidewalks, filling the gutters, and breathing life into the dormant flower beds that lined the courthouse square. It felt symbolic. The town wasn't just recovering, it was beginning again. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense but electric. Blake Harlan sat at the defense table, shoulders hunched, hands clenched into fists on his lap. Gone was the uniform. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the shield of silent allies. In its place, criminal charges for attempted assault, conspiracy to obstruct justice, civil rights violations. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the foreman stood and delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts. There was no outburst, no cheers, only a profound collective exhale. Justice had not been swift. It had not been easy, but it had arrived. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for Naomi's attention. She paused at the top of the steps, the weight of the verdict heavy on her heart, not as vengeance but as a necessary closure. Facing the cameras, she said, "I didn't come to Riverside to settle old scores. I came to help write a new story, one where every citizen, regardless of their color, background, or history, knows they are seen, heard, and protected." She smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "And today we take another step toward that future. The applause from the gathered crowd was soft at first, then built, rolling like a wave across the plaza. Naomi didn't bask in it. She simply nodded, acknowledging not herself, but the work, the journey. In the weeks that followed, real changes began to take root. The Riverside Police Department was completely overhauled. Officers were retrained, reassigned, and in some cases, removed. A new code of ethics was publicly adopted. The Community Review Board, once a rubber stamp, became a genuine force for oversight, staffed with activists, pastors, teachers, and retired judges. Youth programs were launched to build trust early between the department and the next generation. Neighborhood liaisons helped bridge gaps between law enforcement and historically marginalized communities. It wasn't perfect. Mistakes were still made. But for the first time in a long time, Riverside wasn't afraid to face them or fix them. At a small ceremony in Miller's Park, the site where Naomi had nearly lost everything, the town honored her with a bronze plaque set at the base of an old oak tree. To Chief Naomi Fields, for leading with courage, justice, and heart. Riverside's new roots begin here. Children raced around the tree, their laughter filling the park. Old-timers sat nearby, nodding approvingly. The mayor, now a staunch supporter, shook Naomi's hand with genuine gratitude. And Naomi, standing among them, felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for months. Peace. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky blazed with pink and gold, Naomi walked through town, no escort, no fear. At the edge of the town square, she paused at a small bookstore she hadn't visited before. A sign taped to the window caught her eye. New book club forming. Building Bridges, Race, Reform, and Rebirth, hosted by Chief Fields. She laughed softly, shaking her head. The work never ended. And that was okay. Later, sitting on her porch with a cup of tea in hand, Naomi watched the town she had fought so hard for. The porch light flickered gently in the evening breeze. Somewhere down the block, someone played a slow, sweet tune on a saxophone. She closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. The scars she carried, physical and invisible, would never completely fade. But neither would the triumphs. Neither would the hope. Neither would the proof that change, real change, was possible even in the places that seemed least likely. Because change didn't begin with grand speeches or sweeping laws. It began with moments. With people. With the quiet, unyielding decision to do what was right even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. And in Riverside, against all odds, that decision had been made. True change is never easy, but it begins when one person refuses to accept injustice. Courage, integrity, and compassion can transform even the most broken systems, and healing starts when a community dares to believe in a better future. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more powerful, true-to-life stories that inspire change and hope. Let's spread the message that justice and courage can light the way forward.